Hi there, and welcome to PodRocket. So today we have a very interesting episode that we're going to bring you on Node.js and what's happening in the land of Node 18, which is coming out now. So today we have Beth Griggs with us. Beth is a senior software engineer at RedHat and part of the Node.js technical steering committee. Hi, Beth. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So, you're working at RedHat and you're on the Node.js technical steering committee. And from my point of view, that does look like two very, separate and intense positions and areas of responsibility for you to uphold. Is it kind of like the same job that you do, or do they one and the same?
Yes, so I'm in we have a Node.js runtime team at Red Hat. It was previously at IBM, but I hopped over about 18 months ago. My whole role is related to both Node, the open source project, and also some Red Hat Node.js focuses. So it's a nice mix of the two kind of priorities.
And are you a fan of the JavaScript ecosystem yourself? Love developing
Yes.
it? Because, okay, I know, when you're in a senior position, I'm sure you've run through the gamut of languages. So it's good to hear that you're working in what you love in in an ecosystem you really like. So as I mentioned in the intro, I'd love to talk about the new Node version that's coming out. I think that this is one of the things that kind of flies under the radar unless you're like in the weeds or you're in that senior position where you have to make decisions about, different paradigms that you might change or different languages. So, this is something that I might not look at, but when you go search what's going on, oh, there's a new fetch API that's coming out. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
So if you're listening and you want like the latest updates, let's get into it and talk about, what those are. And I'm also curious if we can sprinkle in there how you guys do release cycles.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody that's stepping into this and being like, all right, I want to start keeping up with how these things get released. How do I check it and stuff like that? So maybe we could start there with how you perform the release cycle and your responsibilities.
Sure, yes. So I am a very active member of the Node.js release working group, and they have like delegated responsibility over all of the release policies and processes. So it's our group that really, sets the schedule and prepares the releases and does all that. And the key thing we aim for in the release working group for the release cycle is to be predictable. And this came about probably not long after the IO.js and Node.js merge. They realized it was very valuable to have a predictable release cycle because that helped, the larger enterprises start adopting Node.js because, way back then it was still an early open source project. They were probably used to the Java kind of ecosystems more, where they had a predictable release schedule and cadence and the long-term support policies. So that was introduced into Node, and we've tried to keep to that. It can be a little bit complicated if you're not like reading through the policies every day, but generally the policy is odd numbered releases are only ever current, and current is what we use. You could kind of think of it like a beta release. It's how you get the latest features, how you play with the latest updates, and get your hands on all that stuff. But it's actually the even number releases which get promoted to long-term support, and those are the kind of release lines you want to be building your enterprise-grade applications on. So what we find is a lot of businesses like Red Hat and our clients, because they are operating massive deployments, they will stick to the even-numbered release lines and maybe just test against the odd-numbered ones because they're more beta release lines. And Node.js 18 is very much exciting particularly for many people because they will adopt Node 18 at some point, probably in October when it reaches long-term support. So it may be the first time they get their hands on quite a few features.
And so that's because, as you were saying, this mechanic of Node 17, which we're all using right now, that's the beta. We can think of that as, or the beta, I would say. I'm going to say beta. Yeah, so we can call that beta. So now there's going to be a almost like a two major version shift for the enterprise folks. Okay, gotcha. Very interesting. And yeah, Node 18 does seem really exciting. I probably can't read this at the same level of depth that you can. I did see the fetch API was becoming standard, and that's huge for me because I'm in the serverless and Lambda type of stuff, but I'm sure that is just the tip of the iceberg. So if we want to jump right into it, what are some of the features that you're most excited about or you think other folks might have their eye peeled on?
So in the kind of release announcement, the three key things we tried to put out there is one, the like V8 JavaScript engine upgrade. And so with every major version of Node.js, we tend to upgrade the underlying Google Chrome V8 engine. And it's actually through that update that we pick up some of the JavaScript, language syntax features. I think in these release, because we've gone up to V8 10.1, we've picked up some of like the new array methods like find last and find last index, those kind of things. So that's always exciting because it's how Node developers get their hands on, the new JavaScript language features and syntax. But generally, each version of V8, they'll be working quite a lot, investing a lot of effort into performance improvements and tweaks. So in theory, over time, maybe things like private classes or things will be optimized slightly differently in newer versions of V8.
Now, the V8 engine, you said that's coming in a 10.1?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know much about the V8 engine. What is this update we're getting now more of a performance update, more of a a semantics update? Because I know there have been some years that the V8 engine just like got a ridiculous performance boost or something. So is this a similar year like that, or what's the nature of it?
Yeah, I think it's more of a typical upgrade. There's no like massive new, to my knowledge, groundbreaking performance change that I know of. But it's a mixture. It's like a typical update. What we see a few new features, like the array APIs being available, and also some performance tweaks and improvements.
Gotcha. Okay, and the fetch API, I'd love to talk about that really quick. I know I've mentioned it twice already because it's really exciting. So before, I had to pull in a package, and now this is one of the things that's just going to be shipped. Are there any concerns about security of being able to contact different websites or directly in the engine, or like it being shipped by default, or is there anything that you think is going to change with the development of the fetch API?
Yeah, so there's quite an interesting story to this one. The Fetch API was introduced via the Indici, so it's based on the Indici implementation. And Indici was
And how do we spell
created
that? Sorry if I may.
UNDICI.
Okay, awesome.
The Italian word for 11, I think, but don't quote me on that. And it's an implementation from the ground up of HTTP 1.1. They added the Fetch API into that project, and now in Node 18, we took the decision to expose the Fetch API that's based on the implementation that's in that project in Node 18 by default. It is experimental, so the Fetch API in Node can change. We have this notion of experimental features, and if you're using those, you should use them with it in mind that these things may change based on feedback. But our motivation there is we want to get these features out because people will only tell us what they want from them if they can actually start playing with them and start using them. So that's why we have the experimental status on it. I believe there is a difference between like Node Fetch and Fetch. Certainly, it's early days in the implementation in Node. I'm seeing quite a few feature requests coming in from people saying, "Hey, this is supported in this package I use. Could it be added to the Fetch API that's in Node?" But generally, the motivation is Node saw value in having a Fetch API inbuilt. It was very much requested. They are trying to stick to the Fetch spec where it, not completely, but where it aligns with Node. So some things in the spec may just not make sense in the concept of, server-side development. But in the places we can align with the spec, that's what they value and aim for.
And so this is going to, if you're just a regular user of HTTP 1.1, probably this is going to cover the majority of use cases, we can assume, right? Okay. Very exciting.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's to me, its best use case is like, so often I'm creating like little proof of concepts or demo apps where I just need to, get some data into my app and parse it. Having a very simple, covering most minimal cases API available by default, I think it will help quite a lot of developers, particularly if they're coming from, the front end space. Conceptually, they will know roughly what a fetch API should do, and they should be able, to hop and pick it up a bit more without having to learn, how would I do this in Node, 5 years ago.
Do you ever worry that there's nodes becoming a little too magic? You know, this is I mean, this is a conversation. If you go ask somebody that programs in Rust or Go, they're gonna go, yes, of course it's too magic. But then you ask the majority of developers who are making really cool stuff, and it's like, no, it's great. What's the perspective from, you know, yourself in the hot seat here on the Iron Throne? Like, do you get a lot of people like asking for things, and you're just like, that's ridiculous. You know, we're not even gonna consider that.
I think there's a mixture, and certainly in my experience, I've been in the project maybe about 6 years in total, varying levels of involvement over the years. But I remember when I first started, there was a very big notion of we need to keep Node as small as possible. It has to have the smallest, core possible. We shouldn't add all of these extra, features, even things like the fetch API, because you can just npm install them from the npm ecosystem.
So it's kind of a keep it modular sort of.
Yeah, modular, like lightweight, customizable runtime. But now, actually, I have seen that kind of change over the time, at least in the past 5 years. There seems to be more acceptance that actually having some of these things built into the runtime is helpful, like the fetch API and the test runner that's now bundled.
Right.
Because
We should
for the
talk about that. It's certainly.
yeah, so I think it's really good for the newcomers to Node, because choosing which node module to use is a whole challenge in itself and requires context of the landscape. So if people can just pick up Node, and for the first time they're building with it, or for a very where they don't need all these enhanced features or enhanced customization, if they can just pick up the runtime, that can make their life easier from learning, from even in enterprise. Like, you often have to verify all your dependencies and get them vetted by your company and get them approved. If you don't need to do that, because you can just have the runtime approved and build things up from there, that's helpful in that case too.
And we're getting to the correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we're also getting to the area with computers and personal, you know, end devices where you have more liberal space to have a bigger runtime if that's what needs to be to make the ecosystem stronger. That's something you guys consider?
Yeah, it's very much a trade off. In the project, we have recently tried to define our technical priorities and even try to order them. And I think at the top is developer experience. So we need to look at these things on a weighted basis. If people are coming in saying this API would have this many benefits, yes, it has a cost. Those are the kind of decisions we're making, and we're adding things to improve the developer experience. I think that's our priority.
I mean, you need the builders. It's kind of like this thing with the Web3 space that's going on. The projects that survive, the projects that have good developer experience, where actually cool things are being built. So, yeah, I feel like everybody will vet that decision as a really good one just by natural selection. Now, yeah, I'm just running down some of these things I wrote down, looking up at in the Node 18. I didn't know it was like such an amazing update. As I said, I'm most excited about the fetch API, but we touched upon the testing suite that's coming through. I'm a huge fan. You know, there's Mocha, there's all the Jest, there's awesome stuff out there. But tell me about the testing API, the unit testing stuff that's coming out, and you know what you think about it.
Yeah, and that's some great work done by Colin, who's also on the Node Technical Steering Committee. Contributed it's experimental again, so people should use it with it in mind that it may change slightly. There may be some breakages or breaking changes, but that will be based on the feedback we get. And again, it's a similar motivation, at least I see it, is for a lot of people when they're building very small, prototype apps, which I think Node's perfect for, to get demos, proof of concepts running, quick and easy like front ends, backing some data. I think that's the perfect use case for Node. Um, a lot of the time, they like some of the only things in their package JSON would be a test run, like a test framework and a linter. So we're looking at these things, thinking if everyone needs one of these, could we save a lot of these folks' effort by providing something minimal in Node Core? It's not setting out to be like a replacement for these full-fledged test frameworks, which each have their place. But again, it's for the case where I think from newcomers coming to the language, would you have the knowledge to choose between Jest and Mocha for your project. I don't think you could come to that decision until your project got complex enough that you need a specific feature from one of those, or you know what one would work better. So by providing a test runner that has a minimal interface and covers the the minimal set of requirements that you need just to test like an API or just to test, I think that's really helpful. It saves that decision making process until people's applications maybe get a bit more complex and they know what they need. They know what additional need they need from a test runner, and then they can go out and find one that suits that need.
So the role of this unit test framework is sort of, it all encompassing for people getting into the language, for people that just need to get testing done. Maybe when you get to the bigger enterprise projects, you're going to want to choose between a fully fledged framework like Mocha or Jest.
Yeah,
Okay,
for
gotcha.
sure. And like if you're building like React type applications, maybe you would lean towards Jest or something like that. But yeah, like, so we want to provide something that's useful universally for like a good set of people, but we're not setting out to like replace all of these great test frameworks that have all the customizations and are more full-fledged features.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a good distinction to make. I wasn't sure if I should change all my Jest stuff over to the new one and try it out. Are there any features in this release coming out that you think are really cool or novel that we didn't talk about so far? I know there are more. But I just wonder from your perspective.
Yeah, to be honest, I think to me, when I'm talking about the release, the fetch one's going to be so useful for so many people, and also the test runner. Those are the two key ones I always tend to call out. Our release process is kind of interesting because when we get to like 18.00, a lot of the changes that were included in that initial Node 18 release are the breaking ones, and breaking changes aren't often the interesting ones. It's the Semver Minor, so the featureful releases that pick up all the new features, and we ship current releases every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks you could be picking new features up with the current release line. So sometimes I feel there's an expectation that like, hey, Node 18's come out with all of these new features. Some of the ones we talk about actually have been released in like 17.10 or the most recent 17 release, because we are shipping features every 2 weeks. So yeah, it's an interesting. We get a lot of like hype around the Node 18.00 release, but when you look at the breakdown, that the things that are queued up waiting to go into 18 are the things that have breaking changes or breaking consequences. So they may not be as exciting, all of the other things that you see listed in that exact changelog, but that's because we've been picking these features up for the past
Right.
few
So
weeks.
I guess we could say all those other features that have been picking up, now it's putting the rubber stamp of approval. Like you're shipping the PR now.
Yeah.
Okay. It's becoming.
Yeah.
Is there anything that didn't get in there that you feel like should have been in there?
Yes, there was. I was preparing the release, and up until I tried to set like a release freeze 7 days before the release, and then like 4 days before, people like opened a PR. This cool new feature is gonna hopefully make it in, and I was waiting to see if I had enough time to merge it in. One of those that just missed the cut was a parse arguments API. So typically you'd use something like, is it Yargs or something to parse command line arguments. Again, there's been a lot of work from a great group of people prototyping what a parse argument API would be in Node. And they opened a PR to actually get it merged into Node, with the view of hopefully getting it into 18.00, but just about missed it. But actually, that should be in a new release, in the next couple of weeks, probably in 2 weeks' time, because even though that feature missed 18.00, it's not breaking, it's Semver Minor. We'll just ship it in like 18.3 or something like that. But that's a similar motivation. It's a simple command line argument parser, because that's a very common, action that people need to do in their programs. So shipping a minimal version of it by default helps folks out.
Do you ever get angry people who say, listen, my thing should have been in there, and Beth didn't let me, so I'm mad at Beth?
not Not so much. I think people are mostly quite respectful of the release's time. If the releaser says, "Look, I do not have the time to, update the release on a Saturday, redo builds." Part of that is we run a tool called Canary in the Goldmine, which is called, we shorten it to Sitchin. On every release, we've got like 100 npm modules that we run their test suites for, so that we can test whether we've broken like the ecosystem.
Wow.
So we've got the obvious things like Express in there, and that takes like 3 hours to
Right.
run, and then you've got to read through the results. It's like, yes, you might say, "Hey, can we quickly squeeze this PR in?" But the consequence for the release is like, we got to rerun all our release testing, we got to rerun all our smoke testing, we have to go through the results, rerun the builds. So to me, people don't really get angry, because normally the things can just wait until the next Semver minor release, which will only be 2 weeks away. Yeah, a few things have missed it, but they've normally missed it because consensus hasn't been reached, and the Node project does value, having those discussions, because we don't want to land things, revert them, break a bunch of folks, because we haven't had those lengthy discussions.
Talk about exhaustive when it comes to running your tests. You're really running through.
Yeah.
You got to be sure. I mean, you really hold a lot of responsibility. I'd say the majority of the world runs off of this ecosystem in some part of the business, right? So, do you ever feel nervous being in this position of actually going into the weeds with scissors and cutting down the grass that's
Yeah.
just an inch too tall so the lawn looks nice?
Yeah, it's when I remember the first time, like, we literally have a script that's like promote release, and it's like yes or no. And I remember the first time like pressing yes on that. It was quite nerve-wracking. Our processes are pretty sturdy, to the point where if something did go wrong, we know that we can, revert the commit, do a follow-up patch release. I'm confident enough, I know the path to resolving most of these things. The nervousness does come from having these discussions, and sometimes we're trying to guess the impact of what some of the decisions we're making will be. But then we do have tooling that helps with that, like that tool I mentioned, Sitchin, where we test a bunch of the 100 most popular modules to see whether we're going to break everyone.
So these discussions, who are the other people discussing? Do you guys sit around like a big round wooden table with pints of beer, or like how does that work?
The Node project works on a consensus-based model. So anyone in any PR could go in and say, "I have concerns, I'm going to block this." And we then have to work through the resolution process. That is partly why we have a technical steering committee. And in general, in my experiences, we don't like things to fall onto the technical steering committee. It's kind of an escape hatch for when consensus can't be reached among the community, the wider community, all of the contributors, all of the collaborators. And actually, I prefer consensus to be reached among those groups, because you're bringing in people with sometimes more context. For example, when the test runner pull request, having, maintainers from some of the other test frameworks being involved in that discussion is very valuable. They can, raise points that maybe the Node core folks haven't appreciated. So our pattern is we're trying to reach consensus in a pull request or in a commit. If it really can't be reached, it will go to the technical steering committee. We meet weekly and talk about any PRs that are being blocked because someone objects to them. Generally, we don't try to go to a vote. We will try to find a path to resolution. But if we can't, we do get to the point where we vote on an issue. The TSC will say who prefers option A or option B, and the result of that vote will be what happens in the community. But we try to avoid that, actually. We prefer consensus to be reached amongst.
It's sort of like it's like a typical decentralized open source project, and you want it to function in that holistic way, right? Right. Okay.
Yeah, and it can be great, but it can also be exhausting for some folks, because your PR could span a massive discussion that takes a long time to work through. But I personally see that as a feature, particularly with the age of Node and where it's at and where it's being used. If something is controversial, we should have that discussion, and having that discussion's, to me, a feature of having so many people involved in the project.
It's like a global vetting process on top of the technical steering. All right,
yes.
Gotcha. Now, this might be a little not directly in line with just the V8 engine and stuff, but I just did a podcast recently talking about WebAssembly. So there's some really exciting stuff coming out there, in-browser databases, things that let you query really fast, things that let you stream really fast. I know there's Streams API update coming with this one. What's the way you guys view WebAssembly coming onto the block and the role of Node.js working with WebAssembly or against it?
Yeah, so I think generally, like, Node.js is seen as a complementary technology with like everything that's happening in WebAssembly. The Node project does have a library. It has some WebAssembly system interface APIs so that you can, load and execute and interact with your WebAssembly applications through Node. So it is of interest to us. We think Node's in a good place to complement everything that's happening in that space.
Right on. Yeah, because the types of benefits that are coming with WebAssembly are they're wild. The gentleman who was on the podcast, Andre, a few days ago, he was saying, the amount of speed up we're gonna get with these dynamic front end applications and stuff. You can't not have it moving forward with the big amount of data coming out. So it's great to hear that you're coming from a situation or a perspective of we want to work together. We want to continue to make these complementary technologies.
Yeah, I think there was also some discussions, I'm not sure where they led, around whether we could, use WebAssembly within Node Core and to get some speed enhancements in those certain places where it makes sense. But I believe those discussions are still happening at this point.
Okay. So. Is there anything you think is too messy in Node right now that maybe it didn't make it into the release, but it's on the roadmap of like, we want to clean this up, or this API needs to be like changed very quickly because it's getting too outdated?
I think just generally, so the Node project doesn't have a roadmap as such. So we don't have a list of priorities or a list of features that we want to land. So I think that fact in general can make it quite hard to follow what's next. Generally, what lands in a release will be what folks have or contributors have invested effort in to contribute. So they may be contributing because they're representing a need from a client they know. For example, at RedHat, if we were speaking to lots of customers and they said this API would be really useful for us, we could then go and contribute that API. But then otherwise it could be just, I have an interest in, creating something, and someone will just put a PR and add something else. Not knowing exactly what features are coming up can be slightly confusing and slightly hard to untangle. We are trying to fix that slightly. We have kicked off a Next 10 effort, and the Next 10 effort was kicked off with a view of saying, Node's had a really successful first decade or so. What would Node need to have in the next 10 years to continue to, have the success it's had in the past years and the future years? And in that group, we are getting together, talking about features, technical priorities. Some of when we have had like mini summits, like virtual summits, where we've had 2 or 3 hour sessions where we've talked about WebAssembly, for example. We will have a WebAssembly session and ask ourselves, what can we offer in Node to complement this technology, or what do we need to do to stay competitive? We have competitors now. I think that's a great thing. There are other runtimes, innovations happening in other spaces. We can look to see what they're doing, to see what our wider developer ecosystem wants, and if it's proved out in other runtimes that it makes sense for Node, that's great because we know it's going to be valuable.
So do you see that, this conglomeration of all the packages that, or I want to say runtime improvements that you're bringing in, is this also motivated in any way by the security of the ecosystem? We had a show a few weeks ago talking about your source packages, and as you said, when you're an enterprise, you really want to make sure you're bringing in the right code from the right repos, and there was the faker.js problem and stuff like that. So is this in any way reactionary to this sort of like move in the ecosystem, or was it purely there's newcomers, it's convenience based, we want to improve the core API?
I think there's been, like, particularly in the context of security, I think every few months we get quite a high profile npm problem or attack that's happened in a high profile dependency. And I think there's actually been discussions in Node space for quite a few years about implementing like policies on what you load, how you can verify dependencies. We've got folks from npm involved in the Node core project, so they're obviously focused on improving some of these issues. So yeah, I'd say, like, most folks in the community are aware of these problems. We have some significant efforts around how we can improve the security model, and dependencies. Lots of various efforts going on in different places. But yeah, it's definitely played a part.
Right, and there's a lot of new tech coming out to help play that part. That seems very interesting too. There's this one visualization I saw where it shows all of your packages in one cube, kind of, and you can see how big they are by how big that little cube is, and like how they're linked together. Never seen something like that before, so it gives me security thinking about, I don't know where these packages are coming from, and if I can pull in the fetch API right there, you don't even have to get it. I don't care who's posting it because it's right there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's an unspoken, really cool feature of bringing things into the runtime.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's a key problem we're trying to tackle at Red Hat, and that's one of my more Red Hat focuses, to try and work through this problem of understanding your dependencies, understanding what makes sense to be used in a production enterprise grade environment. So the way we've tackled that problem at Red Hat is we're trying to produce a reference architecture where we have kind of like some just internal guidelines of good defaults. For example, for a web framework in our reference architecture, we say, if you have no reason to use anything else, Red Hat clients and Red Hat teams have had a lot of experience and success with using Express. So here is a good default. It's not trying to say you must always use these exact, tools to build your applications, but the way we're approaching that problem at Red Hat and the enterprise is by looking at what experience we have within the org, what case studies we have, actual examples of applications that are running well, highly scalable, and we're saying, what are they using? Let's define those as good defaults, and going from that to try and solve part of that problem.
Have you heard of socket.io?
Briefly, yes, briefly.
It kind of what I was talking about with the cubes, which is like, I don't know, just the front end piece of that, but it does exactly kind of like what you're talking about, which is like, how is this package maintained, like who's been pushing to it, how much does it get downloaded, how many bugs are raised, and it gives you a quantitative view. Yeah, that's really neat. I think it's a huge problem that's not tackled enough.
Yeah, that's the slight difference. What we found is a lot of modules on npm were maybe very popular like 5 or 10 years ago, still getting millions and millions of downloads, but when you actually look into it, it may not be maintained. Its last release might have been 3 or 4 years ago. It might have security vulnerabilities in there. One of the key determinations what we make at Red Hat of whether a module is good to build on top of is how many contributors are there to it. Would you want to build an enterprise grade application on a project that's controlled by one single individual, would you rather, build on top of a community-owned framework that's, got open governance? This is where the OpenJS Foundation, which is the foundation that Node sits in, is beneficial, because you have a bunch of projects in there that are committed to having a neutral open governance foundation. So you're not, when using these projects, you have some confidence that they're not just going to be controlled by like a single vendor, a single person who could, one day deprecate, or they can make a change and you may not have a say in that change. So we tend to lean towards community-owned frameworks where you've got lots of people from lots of different companies contributing, much like Node itself.
Now, before we're running up on time here, we're past the 30-minute mark. Before I ask you for links and shout outs and things you want to give, I have a specific request for a resource to mention. Where would a listener or viewer go if they wanted to learn more about the system of governance that surrounds Node.js? There's a lot of foundations and bodies and groups of developers, and you can search up who's in charge of the release cycle, and you'll get a few answers, and will probably be pointed to the technical steering committee and among other folks. Is there some place where you can kind of get a rundown about, these are the parties involved, these are kind of like how things work?
Yeah, for Node, I think we have in our GitHub repository, I think we have a governance like markdown file to try and describe some of that. But also you'd probably need to look at the Node.js Technical Steering Committee repository, where we have our charter and our policies in there, and that describes some of the working groups that we have. We have this notion of working groups where a working group has delegated responsibility for an area. The release working group has delegated responsibility, which means they own the release process, they own the release policies, they make the decisions in that space. But another place to look would be probably the OpenJS Foundation's website, which is openjsf.org. That would describe more of what the foundation provides us as a home for the Node.js project.
So we'll just say there's the governance markdown file, there's the OpenJS F for foundation with the F at the end. Okay, great. And then the technical steering committee repo. Okay, awesome. And now your turn. Is there any links you want to give, or like any socials you'd want to post, or shout outs you would want to inform our viewers about?
I think it'd be great to advertise that the OpenJS Foundation is hosting its OpenJS World Conference in June, and it's going to be in Austin. And there's going to be lots of great talks there and videos after the fact should be published on their channel. And there'll be a lot of people heavily involved in the OpenJS Foundation projects talking about their projects. I think there's a keynote from Faros talking about Socket.io as well. So lots of interesting stuff to follow there. One of my key calls to action whenever I'm talking about a release is, what is great is if while Node 18 is in its current phase, so the 6 months from April to October, to play with the release and tell us if things are broken. Because if you're struggling to upgrade, it may have been a mistake. We may not have meant to make, that change might have been a side effect of something else that wasn't intentional. So give us feedback on the release, do it in the Node.js Node repository or the Node.js help repository even, because that really helps us mature the runtime so it works for our end users.
Okay, Beth, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on the podcast, educating me and everybody else about, some of what's going on behind the curtain and how you think and operate about, this awesome ecosystem where we build awesome stuff. So, thanks for coming on, and we'll see you around.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.